take it away, Hazel.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Hopefully this will be, our plan is that this is a very interactive session. We want your questions, we want your comments, we want your thoughts. So please do speak up through the chat, put your hand up, use the microphone. To introduce ourselves, both Elaine and I are members of the ASCILITE Executive. I've been on the executive now for 4 or 5 years. I've also been on a conference organising committee when it was at Toowoomba in 2017. I've been a regular presenter at ASCILITE conferences since 2008, and I've been honoured to received 2 Best Paper Awards. One was a Concise Paper and one was a Best Student Paper. For those who don't know me, I have just in the last month completed my PhD, and both those papers were related to my PhD. And Elaine?
Well, first of all, congratulations, Dr. Jones. And yeah, my name's Elaine Huber. I work at University of Sydney in the Business School. I manage a team of educational designers, developers, a media team, and I've been involved with ASCILITE for a long, long time, writing papers, presenting papers, and also reviewing papers. And I foolishly admitted that I had also won a Best Paper Award a while ago now, and so yeah, I offered to join Hazel to run this session and talk about our experiences and just to and help answer some questions. But just a small caveat there, neither Hazel or I are on this year's organising committee, so we'll do our best to answer any questions you might have, but we might also refer you on to the organising committee. Okay, so shall I get started?
So what makes a good ASCILITE paper or a good conference paper or a good AGIT paper or any journal article? These are the things that we came up collectively with what it is. And the first one for me was the passion and the personality. If you can write about something that you are passionate about, that you've been heavily involved in, as for me with my PhD, it's much easier to write. And you need to let that passion and your personality come out in that writing. We all have different personalities and we all write in different ways, but let that shine through. Don't think that you have to be bland and fit a box, as it were. You can let some of that personality and yourself flow through in what you're writing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And on the subject of flow, so our next point was really about that narrative. And having reviewed a lot of conference papers, it's often clear when it's a joint paper, you know, there's some different styles of writing within there, and maybe the paper's been divided between 2 or 3 people and they've each written different sections. So maybe it's worth, you know, so it's really good if there's a story that can be told, because for the reviewer who has to read quite a lot of papers, they really want it to flow and they want it to be easy to read. And so I would recommend, if you are doing sharing a paper, co-writing, then do get one person to do the final kind of connecting piece and make sure that it has a continuous style.
Yeah. And knowing your audience is also important. Remember that this conference, this association, has a very big TEL, technology enhanced learning, for anybody who isn't aware of that acronym, but you will hear it all the time. The focus needs to have a TEL focus, and educational, obviously higher education is where ASCILITE sits, so don't write something that's for the school sector and hope to get it into the conference, because it's not going to happen. And So think about who you're pitching it to. And as an example, the paper that I won Best Paper in 2019, the student paper, an earlier version of that I'd actually put into a different conference and got an outright reject. So don't think that getting a really great paper is always easy. It can take several iterations and really thinking about who you're targeting, where you're targeting. Is this the right audience? Is this the right paper for this audience? And make sure that as you're one of the final sections, particularly for full papers, that you have that implications for the sector and for future research for yourself and for others. How is what you've done in your context, whether it be something like science in a first year class, how will that relate to a third year business class or something like that? Try and find those links so that you're extending your audience out as far as you can.
And then the other thing that Hazel and I discussed was about providing enough evidence. And sometimes this is hard in a concise paper and a poster, say, but it needs to be broad enough that, like Hazel said, you can speak to other members, so other disciplines, or be broad enough. But it also needs to be deep enough that there's enough evidence, and it's not just hearsay or perception of N=1 case. So do try and make it rigorous, and then use the templates that are there, that are available. They will help guide you and help you keep to the sort of the narrative, back to that word, that we are looking for as reviewers.
And if you're new to ASCILITE conference, I would, and even if you're not, I would certainly recommend reading back over some of the best papers, some just random papers or targeted papers through the last few ASCILITE conferences. Pick ideas from people that have done well, people that have published regularly in the conferences, for the way that papers are written. Look at the titles. So often people will try and include that theme in the title or a link to it at least. But make sure as well that you're citing current and relevant papers. At least half and probably more of your papers that you're citing should be current, as in the last 5 years. And there will always be some papers that you need to cite that are from earlier, and particularly with one of the themes from this year, that could be relevant to have older papers in there. But as a reviewer, I certainly I do a quick count and have a look at how many papers are less than 5 years compared to greater than 10 years. And if there's not a balance towards the newer ones, then I will certainly make a comment. And not just use ASCILITE papers, of course. Get your references from a broad range of sources.
But especially, I guess, peer-reviewed sources are best.
Yes.
And then obviously, I mean, the last point might seem quite obvious, but really think about how you can link your paper to the theme. Now, the themes of conference themes and sub-themes are always pretty generic. They're pretty wide-ranging to allow all sorts of ideas to bubble up and filter through. But if you can actually make that link directly to one of them within the writing, and many people manage to do it even in their title of their paper, I think it's a really good idea, and it is one of the criteria actually. And it's not that difficult. You sometimes have to think a bit laterally. And before we look at those themes, the next slide will go into a bit more detail, but we just wanted to make a note that we've put at the bottom there that in some years, I think Hazel mentioned in Singapore, the award for best paper was kind of judged on the presentation. So obviously it needed to have met all the criteria, and then the reviewers went to the presentations to double check. But this year we believe that's not the case. It's only based on the writing of the paper.
Yeah, that's how it should be every year. And it was just in Singapore, it was a joint thing, that it was the words, but also the way you presented. But the general rule is, yeah, it's just on those words on the paper, so you need to get that right.
So yeah, we have got a fun theme. ASCILITE does try to keep it innovative and interesting. I did put a little poll. I don't know if you guys can see the poll. I might need to. You should be able to see it there. If you can see the poll, then you can let us know which of the sub themes you're planning on writing about or addressing. Hazel, any thoughts about the general theme?
Yeah, the theme this year, and again, this is just my own personal thoughts, and we haven't had it confirmed from the organising committee, but for me, Back to the Future is quite broad, and it's a bit fun, and you'll notice that it's also one of the sub-themes this year, which is interesting as well. So it's there as the overarching theme, but also as one of the sub-themes. But for me, Back to the Future is about learning from lessons from the past. And one example, for example, from my PhD that I would fit this theme to me is that I took the lessons from implementation of education technologies and to see how that could be adopted, adapted, learn the lessons from that to adopt learning analytics and professional learning for learning analytics. So that is where I think the Back to the Future theme, but also have a look at the movie, and there's lots of sites. I was playing again last night. There's lots of sites that have memorable quotes from Back to the Future, and this may be more for your presentation, but you can see if there's ways of including it through your paper. What were the themes? What were the ideas that were coming out of Back to the Future? And I'd be interested in other people's thoughts if what immediately comes to their mind of what Back to the Future is. And Ray just asked a question about professional development. I think that would come under the leadership, digital transformation, digital citizenship, because I presume the professional development was something to do with TEL. And then, so it's about digital transformation, change of culture and things like that. So that would be what I would suggest.
And again, and this is a really good example, thanks for sharing, Ray, because it could be, if it was about the design of a professional development program, so it might actually be learning design. So again, this is where we think it's really important that when you identify the theme, you make it really clear, like in your abstract or in your introduction, right up front, where that link is. Because yeah, often papers can fit in a number of themes, and one of the reviewer criteria is, does it fit the theme? And if we have to try and decide where it fits, that doesn't always look good, get a good mark. Did anyone else have any comments? I mean, I've got the poll results up there. I think you guys can see the poll. I've hidden show results. So it looks like there's a more leaning towards the learning design and the leadership digital transformation at the moment. Any questions or thoughts about the themes that people want to ask before we move on? The next part, Hazel and I are going to talk about our award-winning papers, but just before we do that, yeah, any open questions?
Kerry and Ray are having a conversation here about things like Second Life and Open Sim. Do you want to elaborate on that, Kerry? Because I think I agree with you.
I'll try to. Hi. I was just thinking about how Second Life and Open Sim showed so much promise and died on the vine due to things like you know, security issues, port issues, and most importantly, bandwidth. And now that bandwidth is becoming less of an issue, and we're looking at trying to recreate physical spaces online. Virtual worlds gave so much, had so many possibilities for immersion and creativity and role play. And as we're looking at putting more degree programs online, I think, perhaps it's worth revisiting some of these virtual world environments to consider, 100% degrees that are 100% online, using that sort of immersion and that feeling of connectedness and being online in those spaces.
Carmen's also put an interesting question in the chat about this Back to the Future post-COVID landscapes. Anyone care to share if they voted for that one? I think there were 2 votes. What are you thinking in terms of this theme? No, Kerry, we didn't ask you specifically. Okay, maybe everyone wants to shout out, which is fine.
I like the comment.
Yeah, I like Ray's comment about resisting the impetus to move back, or the snap back, I've heard it called. Yeah, because it's always, I think, in human nature is to take the path of least resistance and do what's easiest, what comes, what you remember. But it would be good to build on this opportunity to do something different. To move to more fully online. So it could be, the paper could be a little bit, that sub-theme to me could be obviously a little bit more conceptual, building on, there's quite a lot of literature that's come out during the COVID year, actually, 2020, 2021, around the changes. So it could be, you could write a paper that builds on some of that literature, and you could imagine what the future is going to be. It's another option. Oh, good question, Carmen. How many position papers tend to get accepted? I wouldn't be able to guess as a figure, but I think it's a really good point, because I think naturally I've found reviewers tend to fall into the experimental method type paper. Have you collected data, and what have you analysed the data, and what did you find? Or the sort of praxis kind of papers, but the more conceptual or position papers are harder to, I guess, bring the reviewer on the journey with you, so they take a little bit more effort. But they certainly, I think last year, was it last year, or the award winner, the paper that won the award was a conceptual paper. Was it? Trying to remember who it was.
Was it Phil?
Phil, yeah. So yeah, it can be done.
And I think as well, often, and you'll see that on the slides coming up, the concise papers are often more conceptual as well. So that is another way. And yes, Neil, there's a list of how many papers are accepted, but not, it doesn't break it down into the types of papers. And I don't know that anybody would ever have done that analysis. But yes, certainly
I think
it happens. And my concise paper was definitely conceptual as well.
I think the figures, acceptance figures, tend to go into the annual report. Is that right, Hazel? I don't think they go on the website anywhere.
No, they go into the proceedings.
The proceedings, that's right. Okay, should we move on and talk a little bit about, feel free to keep putting your questions and we can answer your questions as we go. But we might just move on, talk a little bit about our award-winning papers. Hazel.
Yeah, and Carmen.
Sorry, there was just this one. Oh, did you want to answer Carmen's question?
No, I was just going to say, I agree that would be an interesting thing. We can talk about that later.
Yes. Okay, so these are the types of papers that you can submit. We are just going to concentrate on full, concise, and poster/pechakucha for now. And just to note, I just pulled this off the website, that you can only be lead on one paper. So you can certainly contribute to others, but only lead one. Okay, Hazel, tell us about your 2016 best paper.
Okay, so, and this was a quite conceptual paper as well. I was thinking of a different paper when I spoke before, but this is the paper that I won Best Concise Paper for. And what we've tried to do in here is highlight the reviewers' responses so that you can see what reviewers are looking for when they're reviewing. And what we need to explain as well is that over the years, some of the criteria have changed slightly, and the ranking may have changed slightly. So this is what it was in 2016. There's not much change, but just we'll show you the rest later. So it was a timely paper. And so anything to do with COVID at the moment, or moving to online, digital literacy, all of those sorts of things would be timely at the moment. Tidy paper, the potential to grow into a significant piece of research, written well, good structure and cohesion. So these are all the things we talked about in that first slide. The passion, the writing, the narrative, synthesis of the literature. But it's not always that, and reviewers will still give suggestions. So there's the bits in yellow are things that they suggested that I could still do further to improve it. But yes, they wanted to know more about it. So you can see there that most of the things, it was excellent or good. So you don't have to get excellent for everything to be awarded a Best Paper Award either. So aim for there, but we're not always going to get 5 5s. So Elaine, do you want to have a look at yours?
Yeah, Heather, with Hazel, was this were you the sole author on this paper?
Yes, all of my, I'm a bit of an anomaly. All of my papers, because they were related to my PhD, and my supervisors didn't write with me, nearly all of my papers at ASCILITE, actually about 50-50 of the papers that I've put into ASCILITE are sole authors compared to working with others.
Okay, so in my paper, it was a collaborative piece, and I have to give full credit to my first author, Yvonne de Villa, who I worked with. She was a great writer, and she's a scientist, so she was very good at ticking all the criteria boxes and being very precise about what we had to do. These are the results from the 2 reviewers that we got. These were the criteria in 2017 that the papers were ranked against. So as Hazel mentioned, you don't always have to get 5s. Our second reviewer was a 3 and lots of 4s. But in terms of some of the comments that they gave us, again, level of coherence, so easy to read. It was of interest to the target audience, which was a criteria then. And even though we wrote about what we'd done, flipped learning in science, we made sure that it had that. So it had the depth of data, but it also had the breadth where we were able to say how it could be applied to other disciplines as well. And then you don't always get good feedback, of course. The second reviewer did give us a full page of things that we should change. but we still managed to win the best paper. But yeah, they were very clear about things that we could improve, and that's another thing. You know, you might get feedback that asks you to make changes, to improve things, and I think if those that do actually respond to those changes, that also leads you in a good stead. So Hazel, tell us about the full paper.
So the full paper was a much more in-depth paper. It was about a survey that I did very early on in my PhD. So there was lots of data and tables, very few graphs because I don't like putting them in the paper. I prefer to put them in the presentation, but that's just my preference. Some people prefer using graphs, but I find that if you want to go back and look at someone's data down the track, it's easier for them to interpret data from a table than from a graph, unless that graph has lots of the data points and easy to read. So think about that. That's another point that you could think about. Is it best to show that information in tables or graphs or other visualizations? Okay, and again, it was aligned to the theme, moving the field forward, solid review of the literature and why the research was important, the strong link between theory and practice, and that's a big thing for ASCILITE, that a lot of our members are practitioners, a lot of our members are researchers, and finding that way of linking papers that are of interest to both groups, are those that who do both, is important. Robust methodology, multiple data collection techniques, and the suggestion there is a really good one for anybody. Review the abstract to really hook in the readers. My abstract was a bit bland for that one, and I think I did work on it. I can't remember how much I changed it, but I tried to respond to that, because as the reviewers noted, that's how you get people to your session. Often people won't have read full papers before they come to the sessions at the conference. They'll have only looked at the abstracts. So that was the reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, of interest to the conference, provide insights and an addition to the field of research. So you can see the difference between the concise and the full, that you need that extra depth and rigour for the full papers than you can get into a concise paper.
I just add a comment there. Yeah. I am notoriously bad for starting with a concise paper, but having too many words and too many pages, and I almost always get feedback from my reviewers for my papers that says, make your mind up. You go, is this a full paper or is it a concise? You need to cut it down, pad it out. So yeah, my advice is aim for one and try and stick to it.
And the difference is that difference between conceptual papers, pilot work, and something that's been rigorously researched and a breadth and depth of data to it.
So I think for Carmen's earlier question about conceptual papers, I've been thinking about that, because when we look here at the criteria for this year's conference papers, they do tend towards, yeah, something that is quite obviously very rigorous, but also this about findings and analysing, collecting data and methodology, and yeah. So I think if you're not following that traditional path, then you just have to think about how you're going to meet these criteria.
But you have got that option there in criteria 3. It's got well-articulated conceptual or theoretical framework. So if you're building that conceptual framework and you've got all the rigour behind it, then it's fine. And these are the criteria for both full and concise paper. They're the same criteria, but if you go to the website and have a look, there'll be slight differences in the explanation of what is expected for the two types of paper.
Yep.
So are there any questions about any of those criteria?
Yeah. Feel free to shout out or put it in the chat. No sound is good sound.
No.
Okay, well, good. We'll keep going. Now, if you can think of questions, do pop them down, or we can save them till the end as well. So there are posters and pecha kucha, and just a couple of comments around these. I believe that at the moment we are still going ahead with the face-to-face conference, and so physical paper or whatever material posters are accepted, as are digital posters. And really, my top tips for them, I did win an award, a poster award, back in a long time ago, 2013, and it was a digital poster actually. And for me, I guess the things I would say think about are keep text to a bare minimum, use colour but not too much colour, so thematic colours, nice on the eye are always good. Use imagery as much as you can, but make it meaningful. Don't just put in images for the sake of break if you haven't got anything to say. Infographics are really good. And then that last point there is really just a point for when you're actually presenting your poster. When there are poster sessions, it's always nice to, if you are there, to discuss what's on the poster, because often people go and see a poster and then don't have anyone to talk to about it, which is a shame. And then in terms of pecha kucha, for those of you, I'm sure most of you will know this term now. So you need to write an abstract of 500 words of what will be in the pecha kucha or in the poster, sort of to give a summary of it. But you don't actually have to submit the actual poster or the actual pecha kucha. You can if you've got it ready, but you don't have to. And the pecha kucha is 20 slides basically that you will narrate or tell a story through those slides in 20 seconds, and it's timed, so it does 20 seconds per slide. And again, a little bit of presentation advice if you do get through is don't rush it, try and talk clearly, and it really helps to develop a script and practice beforehand. And I think this URL, this website, the pecha kucha website, is linked from the ASCILITE website, and it's really worth taking a look. It's got everything you need to know. Any other thoughts, Hazel, about posters or?
No, I think that's it. Louise, in answer to your question, pecha kucha is a very precise and specific thing, and when you send your presentation, you're asked to do it, to submit it, and with the timer, and you will be timed on stage, and there's a moderator who will stand there with a bell and a shepherd's hook if needed to pull you off in time. And I've just, at the conference in Singapore, I facilitated one of the sessions, and I don't know whether it was nerves or just people trying to get too much in the time, but people tended to just talk so quickly that you couldn't keep up with what they were trying to say. So pecha kucha, my only advice would be less is more, but as long as it's 20 slides.
Yeah, you can't play around with that, Louise, unfortunately. Yeah. It's fixed. Which works well, I think, for keeping conferences on time. Any other questions? Should we move on. Does it have to be through Pecha Kucha? Not sure what you mean by that. Does it have to be through Pecha Kucha? So you can just do a digital. So if you don't want to do the Pecha Kucha style, then I would suggest you do a conference paper. Sorry, a concise paper, and then you've got time to do a fuller, a longer presentation. These are just for short, sharp tasters, really.
And if you're talking about, does it go through the Pecha Kucha site and their protocol? No, or that's not how we did it at Singapore, which is why we have to call it a Pecha Kucha style presentation, because otherwise we have to get registered with Pecha Kucha for each conference, and I would doubt that they're doing that. So theoretically, it's Pecha Kucha style.
Okay, good to know. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're just the key dates for those of you who are not familiar with them, if you haven't checked in on the website. So you've got a whole 2 weeks, I think, to get your paper done. And then if you haven't already volunteered to review papers, I highly recommend it. Even if you think you're new to the area, or you haven't done this before, you haven't been to ASCILITE before, it's certainly a great learning experience to review a couple of papers. And I think they usually ask you what your experience is, and then they'll allocate accordingly. So you might get some posters rather than full papers, for example, if you're not that experienced. But it's certainly, it'd be great if you could review before you had to put your own in, because then you'd get a real feel for what to do. But I think, as Hazel mentioned earlier, if you go back and look at proceedings, they're all online. You can get a good feel for, there's the papers that are accepted.
And the more reviewers, the better.
Yeah, less work. And less work. So that's the link to the conference website. Do anyone have any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to ask Hazel or I? See, we've got plenty of time. Another piece of advice I was just thinking about then, something that we've been doing. I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by really great colleagues and very collaborative colleagues in my workplace, and we have, we have a pitching session where we pitch our research ideas and we pitch our conference presentations, and we ask for feedback from within the unit, within our colleagues. So I highly recommend, even if you can just find one other critical friend before you submit it, it's always great to run another pair of eyes past your paper before you hit submit.
And another thing that I thought of as we were talking through there too, this is probably as much for people who have been at ASCILITE for a while. We are using this year APA 7. So
Hazel, I think you froze a bit then. Can you just say that again? It was for me frozen, but could you just repeat that?
That this year, definitely we are using APA 7 for the referencing style. So if you haven't used APA 7 before, please update your software, your way of thinking, have a look at the differences, because there are some subtle differences, and it's those little differences that if you use APA 6 or you use Harvard or you use another style, that's going to be one tick less that you get.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One of the big things there is in the references that to include DOIs for every paper that you can find a DOI for.
Yeah. I think is that new, Hazel? I think it's been on stuck on APA 6 for many years.
Yeah, I think last year was an either or. Yeah. I can't remember last year because I didn't submit anything last year. But
Right.
yeah.
So thank you, Karthika, for that feedback. We'll pass that on to the committee for you. So the link to register does not work.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'm just checking it now. Oh, it opens a Google Doc for me. Oh, no, it opens, oh, I know why it's opening blank for you. So for me, it just goes to your mail client. So for me, it's open Gmail because I'm in Chrome. So it's possible what you might need to do is just right click on that link and grab the URL, but
we'll let them know.
Yeah, we can let them know that too. It's basically just an email to ASCILITE 2021@une.edu.au, and then you just basically say, yes, I'm interested in reviewing. Was there another question there? Yeah, I think Hazel's finished off with a great great quote from the movie. I mean, if you can get movie quotes in your paper, you know, I'm sure you'll get bonus points. Has anyone tried to submit their paper yet? I did hear from a colleague who's very keen, but EasyChair is not yet taking submissions yet. So I'll also give that feedback.
Yeah. I was going to say, has anybody finished their paper yet?
Well, yeah, so my colleague, she went to submit hers and it's not working. But yeah, I'd be keen to know if there's anyone else here who's finished their paper or who's almost there or has got questions that they need answering to finish it off. If not, I guess we could call it a wrap.
And obviously what happens now, the recording will be uploaded to the ASCILITE website, so you can come back to it at any time. And as per the previous slide, the link to the conference page is there, so please. And we hope that we see all of you either virtually or in person at the conference.
We do. Hopefully see you there. Thanks, everyone. Okay.
So stop recording.
Yeah.